The events of the 10th of September 2025 have scarred the world. Millions of lives have been impacted, and all because a radicalized young man thought he could silence the truth. A young woman is murdered on her way home from work on a subway train, and the world grows ever closer to World War III. 2025 has been a turbulent and traumatic year to say the least, and unfortunately, the further the year progresses, the worse it's getting. Good evening, you're listening to The Truth Tank, and I am your host, The Tank. If this is your first time listening to The Truth Tank, a big welcome. If you're a repeat listener, welcome back. Alright, I'm not going to waste any time. This is part 2 to American Martyr. On part 1, we looked at the murder of Irene Zarutska and the ongoing cycle of conflict in the past couple of years. Part 2 is going to be all about the US. We're going to be covering the assassination of Charlie Kirk, as well as mass shootings and political violence in the United States. So without further ado, let's get into tonight's show. This is episode 85 of The Truth Tank, American Martyr, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the murder of Irene Zarutska, and the current state of global affairs. Switching focus back to the US now, and the events that have unfolded in the past couple of weeks. These events are highly disturbing and tell a tale of a culture in crisis. A culture at odds with itself that has been split by political division and ideology, where humans are not seen as people anymore, just them against us. Democrats versus Republicans, left versus right, red versus blue. The war of ideology over logic is unfortunately being waged loud and clear. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are not designed to offend any of my American audience. As I expressed in part 1 of American Martyr, I love America. I love Americans. Most of my audience is from the United States. I'd love to go back there one day. I love American culture and movies and music and things like that. I want to see a strong and prosperous America. So the views I express are not designed to offend. I'm merely trying to understand the massive divide in US culture, especially the political system and political ideology, and in particular gun violence in the US. So please don't take any offense. That's not my intention. I'm trying to understand from an outsider looking in. And I think the world as a whole prospers when America is strong and doing well. I think America could do things differently, and I don't particularly like the isolationist path it's going down, but I generally believe that when America is doing well, the world does well and is a safer place. But unfortunately, over the past 25 years or so, there has been a noticeable decline in the US political system. And there's been a massive split right down the country that is very obvious to see. And most of that is politically driven. But there's definitely been a switch in the culture. Because even from when I was there just over 10 years ago, it seems like a vastly different place to where I'd visited. Just a few weeks ago, a trans shooter opened fired on school children attending a church service. It was a sickening attack and a heinous crime, but unfortunately it wasn't surprising. Mass shootings in the United States are an everyday, or at least every week, experience now. And from someone living overseas, not in the United States, it is truly a bizarre US phenomenon to witness. And it's one that leaves a lot of people that aren't from the US scratching and banging their heads against the wall, because the answer to the problem seems so obvious. But just like everything looked at on part 1 of American Martyr, nothing is a simple topic anymore. Everything is complex and wrapped in layers upon layers upon layers. That makes arriving at a simple answer really fucking hard in the modern day. So I found this article on npr.org titled "There Is No Message: The Search for Ideological Motives in the Minneapolis Shooting, August 29, 2025, by Odette Youssef. A day after an assailant killed 2 children and wounded 18 other children and adults at a Catholic church in Minnesota, the FBI said the attack was motivated by, quote, hate-filled ideology, but online materials presumed to belong to the shooter paint a more complex picture, say several extremist analysts. Instead, they say the emerging profile appears to align with a growing trend of school shootings committed by young people who harbour a misanthropic view of the world, who revere perpetrators of mass violence, and who seek notoriety within communities that share that obsession. Quote, there does not seem to be a coherent ideological motive behind this attack, said Amy Coder, Department Director at the Institute of Countering Digital Extremism. It really seems to be much more about the violence for the sake of violence. Now, I've heard mixed things about this shooter. I've seen the pictures of him on the news. He appears to be a deranged young person. I've heard he or she, whatever it identifies with, was a transgender shooter, and that there has been a spate of shootings and violence committed by extreme trans activists. And this article is saying that the FBI, I think it was motivated by hate-filled ideology. A similar excuse was used for the motivations of Charlie Kirk's assassin. He, quote, had hate-filled ideology or hate-filled thoughts. The authorities don't want to label the hate-filled ideology. So what hate-filled ideology is it? Is it white supremacist ideology? Is it extreme left or extreme right ideology? Is it trans ideology? What kind of hate-filled ideology is it? Because hate is a very broad term, and that could refer to absolutely anything. Is he just pissed off at the world? And I think statements like that definitely bring up more questions than answers, and they create a void that conspiracy theorists will pump whatever theory is convenient, one that aligns with whatever they choose to believe. And I'm not saying that all conspiracies are bullshit, because we know that's not true. It just seems like a little more information could go a long way, and yeah, maybe that's to protect whatever community he actually belongs, he, she, they, whatever it is, belongs to, from reprisals. But in the last couple of shootings, hate-filled ideology seems to be the new catchphrase that has replaced, he was an extreme Islamist, or he harbored extreme religious views. A bit more clarification would go a long way, especially gaining the public's trust back in the alphabet agencies. Kuda and other analysts have been combing through videos that were uploaded around the time of the attack to a YouTube account believed to belong to Robin Westman, the 23-year-old shooter. One showcases handwritten journals totaling over 200 pages. It is phonetically in English but written in Cyrillic letters. Interesting and weird. Another video shows a letter addressed to family and friends written in the English alphabet, and then turns to an array of weapons laid out on a flat surface. They included a rifle, shotgun, handgun, revolver, multiple magazines, a smoke bomb, and tactical belt. Quote, I think the most important thing is what the shooter wrote on the slide of the handguns. Quote, there is no message, said Cody Zoshik, Zorchik, a senior manager at the Institute of Strategic Dialogue. There's an inherently non-ideological indication, which if true is actually pretty scary. If someone is motivated by something, it's far easier to understand and track similar people that might do similar things. But if someone doesn't have an ideology and is just doing this because they're more or less a nihilist, that is a far more frightening animal to deal with. I guess it also makes tracking those type of people far harder as well. A toxic stew of extremist influences. In his social media post, FBI Director Kash Patel said the agency found in Westman's writings and other materials anti-Catholic, anti-religious references, quote, hatred and violence towards Jewish people, and an explicit call for violence against President Trump. But Kuda and Zorchik note that these are just a sampling of the animus that Westman displayed against a wide range of targets. They say that to select just a few is to ignore the larger picture that emerges from the evidence they viewed. That Westman was obsessed with mass killing, particularly of children, for any and no reason at all. Yeah, that's disturbing, and I think worse than if he was actually motivated by anti-Christian or anti-Jewish sentiment. He just wants chaos for chaos' sake. And that's similar to that girl last year that shot up a school. Her manifesto was also as disturbing and as nihilistic. Are these just the random psychos that pick up a gun and just start shooting indiscriminately, or have they been deliberately non-ideologically indoctrinated as a cover for something else to not reveal the groomer's true intentions? Maybe they're part of a larger anarchist group or something like that, or a trans group, or I'm not pointing the finger at anybody, I'm just throwing out ideas, or white supremacist group or something like that. Because that is fucking terrifying if that is true. I also get what Ms. Kuda's saying. If the FBI is only releasing a couple of phrases or slogans that were found from the shooter's notebook that are anti-religious motivated, it makes more sense why this kid would have targeted a church rather than just, a nightclub or something like that. And saying that there is so much hate in his journals, he's basically directing hate towards everybody and everything. And to pick a couple of phrases is disingenuous of the overarching evidence that they have found. Quote, we have found the markers of both right-wing and left-wing political views here, said Kuda. There are a few mentions of overt racism, of overt anti-Semitism, but they're mixed in with a lot of references to many other things. Yeah, that's the fucking, as I keep saying, that's the real scary part, is I guess hatred 10 years ago used to be directed at something. You kind of knew the source, so it wasn't as much of a surprise. Where this new kind of form of hate is so generalized, there's no real direction to where it's pointed or where it's come from. For example, the inner cover of one notebook features a sticker of a pride flag with a rifle superimposed upon it and the words defend equality. Yeah, it's being inclusive by forcing your inclusion upon other people. Also, the handle associated with the YouTube account indicates the numbers 1312, a numerical code commonly used for the anti-police slogan ACAB? Never heard of it. On one firearm, the words "Kill Trump Now" are written in white ink. Okay. So this guy just fucking hates everyone for no apparent reason. But there are also numerous references to extremist movements on the right. Among the scrolls on the weaponry are mentions of the Waco siege, a standoff in Texas between the federal government and a religious group that ended in the deaths of dozens of people, including children. Also referenced in the materials are the Weavers, the family at the center of the 92 Ruby Ridge standoff in Idaho. Both of these events have long animated far-right anti-government and militia sentiments. But Waco was a wacko Christian group, wasn't it? It was the Branch Davidians. David Koresh, he thought he was like the messenger of fucking God or something, and if all the seals were open, it would bring about the apocalypse. So is that considered far right, or is that just religious extremism now? It seems weird that this kid would mention that. Well, maybe not, because I thought the Branch Davidians were like a pro-religious group, or like an extremist religious group, and this kid seems to not like a religion or anything else. But I guess beggars can't be choosers. It seems weird that this shooter references such a broad range of like extremist and hate groups and massacres that have happened in the past, where some of them have been religiously motivated. Because in the 90s, wasn't it the big threat in the US was like the extremist religious groups? The materials are filled with callbacks to neo-Nazi and violent white supremacist killers. Particularly influential, it seems, is a 2019 mass shooting in New Zealand where a violent white supremacist and Islamophobe killed 51 people at 2 mosques. But also in the notebook, the names of several 9/11 hijackers are listed along with other mass killers whom West men apparently emulated. Yeah, this kid just sounds like he's fucked in the head. Like, there's no rhyme or reason. He's idolizing one group that hates the other group and idolizes killers that have killed one group but also likes the other group. Like, he likes the fuckhead in New Zealand who shot up the mosques, but then at the same time also likes the hijackers who hijacked the planes on 9/11. One would be counter to the other. Quote, we have a lot of random references that are really just part of this kind of swirling mass of violent references that we see in these spaces that go to the point that this is non-ideological, said Zorich. Despite the incoherence of the ideology and political references and the scattershot invocations of cultural memes throughout the videos and writings, Zorchik and Kuta say they reflect an increasingly familiar profile of a school shooter. Westman's obsession with mass killers echoes other recent school shooters who have shared an affinity for the true crime community, where participants obsess over mass killers in online forums. In the case, the extensive references to past murderers span the globe and even mention perpetrators from early as 1966. Interesting. Do not get it at all. These people should be lost to history and not worshipped. Other references suggest an awareness of certain cultural markers within nihilistic, violent, extremist spaces, where individuals advocate violence for the purpose of accelerating societal collapse. There are also elements of saints culture, a subculture that venerates far-right terrorists and exalts those who kill high numbers of victims. Yeah, that is just frightening and fucking sick. I think it's much easier to understand someone who is motivated by either religion or was a white supremacist or something like that. You can kind of grasp the ideology and you can at least trace it back to where it might have begun. It makes it easier to look into a person like that, but nihilistic extremists don't really believe in anything, and it makes why they believe the things they believe even harder. So all of those things, both alone and in combination, show us that Westman was really aware of some of these cultural scripts, said Kuta. A complex mental health picture. Authorities in Minneapolis have said they are not aware of any state-ordered mental health treatment for the assailant, but in the video showing a letter written to family and friends, the presumed shooter calls themselves severely depressed and suicidal for years. They also wrote, I am not well, I am not right, extremist analysts caution against accepting these pronouncements as fact. We need to recognize the limitations of relying on this individual's chosen projection of themselves online, said Zorchik. What we have available to us right now is the material that the shooter chose to make available to us. Zorchik said it is impossible to assess from the videos whether the attacker truly suffered from mental illness, but he noted that within certain true crime community subcultures, there is an idealized aesthetic of mental unwellness that many individuals strive to convey. Yeah, that's true and also frightening. It's not just extremists either. There's a lot of people in these subcultures who claim they're depressed or mentally ill. They can't get a job. They're this, that, or the other. It's part of that victim mentality that makes them hate everyone and anything that is doing well, because they've put this limitation on themselves while they can't do anything, when it really most of the time probably comes down to laziness. They don't like people like Elon Musk because he's a billionaire, he's been a successful businessman. He must be the root of all evil, right? Because he's got more money than I have, because I'm too scared to get out there into the real world and make something of myself. It's much easier to say, oh, you're mentally ill, you've got this wrong with you, you're manic depressive, yada, 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 and you need a walking stick, because you're too lazy to get off your ass and get yourself in shape. That is a oversimplification of the issue. I'm not taking away from people who actually do have legitimate mental illnesses, but there's a lot of people who are calling themselves crazy who like the notoriety or the cultural edge that comes with a title like that. Quote, there are two factors that we consider here. One, within the true crime community, a desire to imitate and adopt the aesthetics of past mass killers, several of whom did very much display these mentally unwell characteristics, said Zorsic. Simultaneously, within the true crime community, there is a large population of individuals who claim to be, and very well may be suffering from, dissociative identity disorder. I'm not a huge fan of true crime, but there are several patterns I do notice about people who are really into true crime. They're very disconnected from the reality of what a lot of those killers did to their victims, the way they talk about the violence and the way they glorify or don't condone a serial killer, for instance. I find a little disturbing, and there's millions of true crime podcasts out there, but yeah, I find it a little sick when people will post like about an episode or something, and they make a video about a case and they try to make a joke out of it because they get more likes or views on Instagram. They'll pick up a meat cleaver or something, and that episode they'll be talking about someone who was killed with a meat cleaver, for instance. I find that a little sick because a real person died. It's not made up. It's real life. It's not a TV show. I don't think glorifying a killer or using someone's death for clicks is right. I think it's a little sick. And it's just something I've noticed with a few true crime podcasts. Not all of them. There's a lot of them that focus on the victim, and respect for those ones, because that's what the story should be about, not the depraved soul that decided to end someone's life because of their own impulses. That's the problem I have with Netflix too. They produce so many shows about serial killers and true crime. Very few are ever about the victim. That Jeffrey Dahmer show Monster tried to make it like it was from the victim's point of view, but then you had Dahmer's story on top of that. It kind of needed to be one or the other. They twisted certain facts in that too, which I think took away from the real horror of what that fucking guy did. It'd be interesting to see what they do with the Ed Gein monster, because that guy was a fucking real sicko. I mean, how do you tell that fucking story? And I think if you are going to tell a story like that, it just has to be so brutal and so, well, for lack of a better word, it has to kind of be really devoid of much soul, just so you can just so you can understand the horror better. And then they pick a guy like Charlie Hunnam, who's one of my favourite actors. He does look a bit like Ed Gein, but at the same time, I think he's a bit too attractive for Ed Gein. A bit too tall. So it'd be interesting to see what they do with that, because the Dahmer show was alright. I get what they were trying to do with making it from the victim's point of view, but they kind of glossed over the horror of what he actually did. Like, it wasn't as violent as I thought it was going to be. They kind of made him out to be like they kind of made him out to be this like sicko loner. Where I really think if it was a bit more graphic, it would have shown what a monster actually was. But anyway, I'm kind of rambling now, so back to it. The writings are compounded by random muttering and utterances in the videos, as well as a discordant juxtaposition of video sequences. For example, after showing a letter written to loved ones that urges them to pray for the victims and their families, one video then goes through a slow walk of the deadly equipment that was presumably being prepared for the attack. That included a magazine on which scrawled "for the children." That is fucked. Zorik and Kuda both noted that the layering of these effects feels aesthetically similar to the digital footprint of an individual who opened fire at a July 4th parade in Highland Park in 2022, killing 7 people. I think it's just a little too early to say for sure, but something that a lot of people don't understand when they see individuals like this in the news is that those self-expressions that seem chaotic or unstable or just plain unwell are sometimes intentionally crafted to give that perspective, said Kuda. Further complicating any speculation about the attacker's mental condition is the letter the attacker wrote to loved ones. Unlike some recent school shootings where the assailant's writings highlighted grievances against parents, this letter credits the parents with raising the attacker in a loving and supportive household. It apologizes to family and friends for the, quote, storm of chaos that the attacker was about to bring into their lives. Quote, "This is where we start seeing an extremely complex picture," said Zorchik. Yeah, complex is one word for it. Fucked is another. How do you make heads or tails out of someone like that? Would make trying to track and get to the motivations of these people really fucking difficult. In recent days, this is what we've learned about Charlie Kirk's assassin. Is he came from a relatively normal household, loving parents. There's nothing extreme in the past. And then all of a sudden he does something as horrific as assassinate someone he's never even met. It doesn't make any sense. So far, the authorities have said they believe the attack is attributed to just Westman, but Kuda said that the ecosystem that Westman appears to have come out of is highly engineered by bad actors online who cultivate in vulnerable people a desire to commit violence. Quote, "The way the material in the journals and in the YouTube videos really draw so heavily across many different spaces is very difficult to come by completely organically from someone acting on their own," she said. "So it feels like there are probably certain people or at least certain online communities that are facilitating this process in the background." Yeah, that's frightening. I guess there would be telltale signs in all of these people. If it all came from one central source, there would definitely be a pattern to it, as random as it might seem. Surprising the government hasn't cracked down on some of those servers and some of the sites. It seems like that would be the place to look for these groups and these fucking sick nihilistic individuals that want to cause chaos in society. And unfortunately, I think that is probably the biggest problem with American culture is mass shootings. And unfortunately, they still are an everyday occurrence in the United States. And as I mentioned before, I love the United States. Most of my fans are from there. And this is not meant to offend. I'm trying to figure out why in 2025 mass shootings are still happening. Because other nations don't seem to struggle with this balance between gun laws and the horror that they can bring. From an outsider looking in, it seems like it's an issue that should be on the surface anyway, easy to fix. I know it's a complicated issue. There's already way too many guns in circulation. Even if all guns were banned now, there's already hundreds of millions of them circulating in the US. I know the gun laws vary from state to state. Some it's very controlled and restricted. I think like New York, you can't have a gun unless you have a permit or a license or something like that. But there's other states where you can pretty much buy whatever you want. Mass shootings are nearly uniquely an American phenomenon. I know there's mass shootings in other countries, but the frequency and scale that they occur in America is unlike anywhere else in the world. And Australia banned guns in the late 90s after the Port Arthur massacre. And there hasn't been a mass shooting since. In the last couple of years, there's been a couple of shootings involving sovereign citizens. There was one recently where police and a few innocent bystanders have been killed. And that's classed as a mass shooting, but it's still very random. And obviously in New Zealand, that was a very random event as well. According to Wikipedia, as of the 31st of August 2025, 302 people have been killed in mass shootings, 1,354 people have been wounded, in a total of 309 mass shootings throughout the United States. Mass shooting is considered 4 or more victims in this case, which is pretty fucked. We're in the final 3-4 months of the year, and so far there's pretty much been a mass shooting a day. 309 shootings. It's not even 300 days in the year. And there's nearly a death for each mass shooting. It's so fucked when you think about it. And I know it's such a complex issue, and there's no easy answer to it either. But unfortunately, it seems to be a situation that isn't getting better or going away anytime soon. And according to worldpopulationreview.com, the top countries for mass shootings in 2025 are, unsurprisingly, the US. Number 2 is Russia. Russia has some pretty wild gun laws, which is a bit surprising. I guess you don't hear much news coming out of Russia or on Russia unless it's related to the war. Russia has a total of 21 mass shootings. Surprisingly, Yemen comes in number 3 with 9 mass shootings, followed by the Philippines, Uganda, France, Germany, Canada, Finland, Argentina, United Kingdom, Italy, Netherlands, Czech Republic, and Austria number 1, which is interesting. What is it about gun crime and the possession of firearms in the US? And I know it's in the Second Amendment, but amendments are meant to be amended, as the name suggests. There's so many crimes committed with guns in the US and so many lives have been lost. It just seems really disturbing that nothing has really been done about it. And that brings us to the tragic events that unfolded on the 10th of September, when Charlie Kirk was assassinated during a rally at a Utah college campus. As I mentioned in part 1 of American Martyr, I like Charlie Kirk. I like what he represented. I mean, I wasn't a super fan of his. I didn't agree with everything he said. I think I could probably agree with probably 65 to 75% of what he said. I've been watching his shorts on YouTube for a couple of years. I've heard him on podcasts and I knew who he was. I thought he made a good point. He was a rational person. He approached things from a standpoint of logic, and he didn't ram his opinions down other people's throats. He didn't belittle people either. He wasn't an extreme personality. He didn't just rant and rave at the top of his voice and try to shout his opinions across. He generally listened to other people and was interested in why they believed what they believed. His whole thing was about proving him wrong and being an advocate for Christianity and family and some pretty logical and sensible issues. I respected his opinions. He respected the opinions of others. He did make some good points. And he was one of those rare political influences that could stay calm. And I think the way he conducted himself said a lot about the man that he was. He spoke to his political opponents with respect. Even in the face of some truly unhinged and brainwashed people, he would always keep his cool. His death has invoked reactions on both levels of the extreme scale. There's been the outpouring of grief and positivity, And there's just been the horrid negative reactions that we've been seeing online over the past couple of days. But there's been a lot of positive reaction from the black and white communities. And if Charlie Kirk was this quote-unquote fascist and racist that a lot of extreme left people have claimed him to be, I don't think as many African Americans would be coming to his defense and saying such positive things about him. And from what I saw of Charlie Kirk online, he didn't at all appear to be an extremist or a racist to me. He seemed very rational and logical, and a man that just wanted to make America a better place. He wanted to fight for his truth, and he believed the truth and tried to give his opinion to people in the hopes that it might change their outlook on life and why they believed what they believed. I have a podcast called The Truth Tank. I believe in the truth, and I think it's the most important thing, especially in a time where the truth is subjective and everyone has their own fucking version of it, and you can just believe what you want to believe, and that becomes your truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, even if it is completely polar opposite to reality and what we know to be factually true. I've also been surprised and amazed how his passing has affected people right around the world. There was a vigil held yesterday where I am. If I had known it was on, I probably would have gone. There's been candlelight vigils all around the world held for Charlie Kirk, and his presence was felt on a global scale. The assassination of JFK and MLK more than 60 years ago were historic events in the grand scheme of things. However, at the time of these events, they were isolated solely to the United States. And while they were sad and tragic, I don't think they had the global reach that Charlie Kirk's assassination has had. News travelled slower. You probably wouldn't have heard about it till the day after, or maybe a day or two after, in the newspaper. I don't think too many people had TVs back then, and if they did, there wasn't the 24-hour news, so news travelled slow. I dare say there was probably parts of America that didn't find out about these assassinations until maybe hours, maybe even a day after it had happened. Unlike today with social media, is if someone passes away now, news and information about that person's death is up online within a matter of minutes. Social media and 24-hour news has bridged that gap. This is how I found out about Charlie's passing, waking up on Thursday morning and turning the TV on around 6:20 a.m. I put the news on, as I do every morning. I was making myself breakfast. I went to turn the TV up. The second story on the news was the assassination of Charlie Kirk. When I heard the news of his passing, it was shocking. I think I even said, "What?" out loud. Like, I really couldn't believe it. I was thinking to myself, who the fuck would want to kill Charlie Kirk? He's like the most moderate political commentator that I've seen. It was shocking and baffling at the same time. I continued to watch the news, and I heard the story several other times. I continued about my day, worked out, had a shower, got ready to go shopping. A few hours later, I came home, went onto Instagram, and was just bombarded, like millions of other people, with camera phone footage from the event. It was all over Instagram that morning. The videos of his passing were everywhere. They were reposted millions of times, along with millions of comments. There were different angles. There was videos of the aftermath and witnesses and interviews with witnesses. I was disturbed when I saw the unedited footage of the assassination. You hear the shot ring out. He gets hit in the throat. He kind of shakes. A dark blood gushing out of his neck before falling over. It's one of the most disturbing things I've seen in a long fucking time. And it's kind of disgusting that it's just been circulated around social media like a movie trailer. I think I saw it twice. I don't want to see it again. It's kind of burned into my brain at this point. It's just bizarre modern cultural phenomenon that social media just circulates videos of people's death, and lots of morons on social media take it as entertainment and are so devoid of any empathy or sympathy for the victim they've just seen see die. Which brings me to the next point, which are the reactions to the videos. Some reactions were heartfelt, others were sickening. This event has affected the lives of millions of people. It was really uplifting to see the messages of support and the love and the millions of condolences from all walks of life to Charlie's family, from both the right and the left, black and white, American and non-American. That was, I suppose, one of the only positives in this tragedy. You can see how comforting and how sincere people can be in times like this, and yeah, just some of the videos was really powerful. People who, like, I'd never met Charlie, I wasn't a huge fan, but this is disgusting. He seemed to have been liked by so many different walks of life, which is very rare for political figures in this day and age. But then there were the disturbing and sickening and just outright evil reactions celebrating his passing, on the grounds that Charlie represented something that these maggots didn't agree with. The TikToks, tweets and Instagram videos justifying, making fun and even celebrating this man's death is one of the most fucked up things I've ever seen on the depraved cesspool of social media. Charlie wasn't perfect, but he never claimed to be. He was the most moderate and tolerant right-wing influencer I've ever seen. And unfortunately, there lies one of the big issues. People see him and others as right-wing or left-wing, a blue tie versus a red tie, and so on and so forth. I think the Western world needs to start seeing each other as human beings again. The whole fucking world at the moment needs to be a bit more empathetic and tolerant towards others' differences, because after all, it's these differences that make us unique and special. A few years ago, I really started to think differently about humans in general. I call it my awakening. I stopped believing in flags and national anthems and the idea of nationalism. I started to think of it as divisive, and this is a huge thing that separates people. You're from this country, you have this flag or this national anthem or this accent, so you can't be my friend, or I don't see you as a equal human. And this is something we've seen played out for fucking hundreds and thousands of years. But specifically in the modern day, with the Russia-Ukraine war, people are like, oh, well, yeah, they're Russian, they have to be evil because Russia's at war with Ukraine. Which is simply not true, because there's millions of good Russians, as there are millions of good Ukrainians, and there's good guys and bad guys on every side. It's like saying one race of people is wholly better than the other, and they can never do any wrong. That's a very primitive and outdated mentality to have. Unfortunately, in Western society, I think we've let the people in charge of this game divide us with ideology. Logic is pretty much dead at this point. No one seems to be able to logically or critically think, because they want all their information delivered to them in TikTok form, in a quick 10-second video where they don't have to put any time or effort into thinking or thinking too much. Because God forbid anyone picks up a book or invests any type of time into doing their own research anymore and coming to their own conclusions. They just believe whatever they see on social media. And unfortunately, the United States is a nation divided on itself. And it looks more and more likely that the divide is only going to get bigger and wider from here on out. And it was just over a year ago that Trump was nearly assassinated twice. Fast forward a year and a bit later, a good man is dead for speaking what he believed to be the truth. Something is very wrong with the system. American culture is poisoned to the point that school shootings, political violence, hate crimes are commonplace, and this is speaking in generalities. But I do think there is a very toxic issue in American culture at the moment. And I'm not pointing the finger because Western society all around the world is going the same way. There's just this lack of logic and critical thinking. We're so divided, and the issue of race, gender, and class keeps getting thrown around. It's like this reverse Marxism where people have been indoctrinated into believing one side or the other. Because in Australia there's been 100 days, 100 pro-Palestinian rallies all around the country. And there's also been ongoing anti-immigration, anti-government protests and pro-immigration and equality rallies. And these two groups are at odds with each other, even though they kind of sort of want the same thing. One group preaches about Aboriginal rights and how Australia is racist and Aboriginals have been victims of racism, but they don't really give any specific examples to what they're claiming. Is this historical racism or is it something that has happened recently? As far as I know, nothing too dramatic has happened. And the anti-immigration people want the government to stop bringing in migrants to a country that can't support it because there isn't enough infrastructure to support the people that are already here. Australia has a housing crisis at the moment. There's a lot of families going without homes, and the government keeps bringing migrants in without having the houses or the jobs or the infrastructure to cope with an expanding population. They can't deal with the population that's already there. They're not saying that they don't want migration. They never mention anything racist, and yet every time it's reported on by the media, they ask these race-baited questions from protesters saying, oh, do you like this group, or do you not like immigrants, or whatever. Charlie Kirk's passing is a dark day for the United States, and it's one that could have far-reaching consequences for the nation and those involved. So is it a simple case of a pissed-off, woke individual with a grudge, an intolerant person so offended and outraged by the opinions of others that they felt the need to kill another human to silence them from spreading their message? To me, someone who does that is scared to face the truth. It's also someone who knows that the other person deep down is right, but they view someone like Charlie Kirk as such a threat that their ideas are so dangerous and according to others that only by killing them can they stop the message from spreading, which, as history tells us, only really proves the victim right and makes the message much stronger. Because you're not going to silence the message by killing the messenger. It's going to take on a life of its own and become bigger than you can possibly imagine. Charlie Kirk's assassination can be seen as an act of political violence, and unfortunately political violence is on the rise in the US and around the world. The US isn't the only country to have issues with political violence. Its southern neighbours, Mexico, in the elections last year, were the bloodiest in the country's history. I found an article on Reuters.com titled Mexican Candidate Assassinations Hit Grim Record Ahead of Sunday's Election by Elizabeth Diaz, June the 1st, 2024. Mexico's elections is now the bloodiest in its modern history after a candidate running for local office in central Puebla state was murdered on Friday at a political rally, taking the number of assassinated candidates to 37 ahead of Sunday's vote. That is fucking insane. The US doesn't have numbers like that, but I suppose one political act of violence is one too many. George Huerta Cabrera, a candidate who was running for the council seat of the town of Isca de Matamoros, I'm pronouncing that wrong, was gunned down in the attack, according to the state prosecutor's office. The killing takes the number of assassinated candidates in the 2024 election season to 37, one more than during the 2021 midterm election when 36 candidates were killed. The issue of violent crime has emerged as one of the top issues in this year's presidential contest. Well, yeah, I'd hope so. In which the ruling party of outgoing President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador has been forced to defend a persistently high murder rate, as the opposition has sought to use the bloodshed to argue for change. Ruling party hopeful Claudia Sheinbaum is widely expected to win Sunday's vote and be Mexico's first female president. It's possible that the violence is being used as a means to define the election in advance, particularly when certain interests are perceived to be at risk in the event that a particular political project triumphs, said Armando Vargas. The consultancy has also counted 828 non-lethal attacks, and candidates during the current election season, up from 749 since just Monday. Yeah, they're staggering numbers. Earlier this week, a local mayoral candidate in southern Guerrero State was gunned down at point-blank range during a rally. He was among 560 candidates and election officials who have been given security guards by the government due to persistent threats. Yeah, fucking hell. Dangerous job being in politics in Mexico. Now, political violence is nothing new either. It's been around for thousands of years. One of the most famous examples is Julius Caesar, when he got stabbed in the back 57 times in an act of political violence. Other notable examples are the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, which started World War I, and maybe one of the most famous, Abraham Lincoln, and possibly the most historic and widely viewed act of political violence, the assassination of JFK. I think that's the most reviewed piece of footage in history. The assassination of JFK is, in my opinion, the point in history that the veil was lifted just enough to see who was really running the world. That murky shadow government pulling the strings behind the scenes, and the lengths that they would go to just silence and stop anyone, including a sitting president or anyone else that threatens their corrupt plans to control the way the world works or jeopardize their interests, influence or control over the status quo. So let's have a closer look at the assassination of Charlie Kirk. This article is from theguardian.com, titled "Charlie Kirk's Death Shows Political Violence is Now a Feature of US Life," published 11th of September 2025. The shooting of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk at an event in Utah marks another example of ongoing political violence in the US, now a feature of American life. Donald Trump confirmed on Wednesday that Kirk had died, saying, quote, "No one understood or had the heart of the youth in the United States of America better than Charlie." Kirk, on campus at Utah Valley University as part of a speaking tour called American Comeback, was asked a question by an audience member about mass shootings, including how many involved trans shooters, when he was shot in the neck. And that's obviously a deliberate message, waiting for him to take a question like that before shooting him. How long had that sick fuck been waiting for just the right moment to make that point? The political leanings and goals of the shooter, who is not in custody, and obviously this article was written before they knew the shooter's identity, are not yet known. Kirk is one of the highest profile allies of the US president and his organization Turning Point USA. He helped turn out voters for Trump and other Republicans. He is also known for his inflammatory, often racist and xenophobic commentary, particularly on colleges' campus. I disagree with everything that just said. I have not heard anything racist or xenophobic from him. Yes, I'm not a super fan. I haven't seen every piece of content he's put out, but what I got from his content was more of a Christian values and this is a better way to live, more than xenophobia and racism. The shooting comes as a series of incidents over the past year show an increased level of violence related to political disagreements or intended to achieve political goals. Trump faced 2 assassination attempts in 2024. Last December, a shooter targeted and killed the head of United Healthcare. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's home was burned in an arson attack in April. Judges and elected officials report increased threats and harassment. Several instances of violence have stemmed from opposition to the Gaza war. Separately, in June, a man dressed as a police officer shot and killed a Democratic Minnesota state lawmaker and her husband, and wounded another state lawmaker and his wife. A gunman attacked the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention headquarters in August, killing a police officer. Surveys have shown increased acceptance of using violence for political aims across party spectrums. Robert Pape, who directs the Chicago Project on Security and Threats, wrote in the New York Times that a survey his team conducted in May was its most worrisome yet. About 40% of Democrats supported the use of force to remove Mr. Trump from the presidency, and about 25% of Republicans supported the same use of military to stop protests against Mr. Trump's agenda. Yeah, interesting. Different ends of a similar spectrum. These numbers more than doubled since last fall. When we ask similar questions, he wrote, "We're becoming more and more of a powder keg," Pape told The Guardian on Wednesday. Pape calls the current moment an era of violent popularism. Condemnations for the shooting came from across the political spectrum. Pape has long argued that politicians need to speak out against violence, especially if it's aligned with their own team. These condemnations are, quote, extremely helpful here as we go forward. It won't stop everything, but it helps stop the snowball, he said. Hussein Piker, the progressive streamer who was scheduled to debate Kirk later this month, said on his live stream on Wednesday that it was a, quote, terrifying incident. The reverberation of people seeking out vengeance in the aftermath of this violent, abhorrent incident is going to be generally worrisome, he said. The aftermath of Kirk's death could include increased violence and retaliation, with some right-wing figures already calling for retribution. Libs of TikTok, the right-wing X account, put simply, this is war. Yeah, that is a worry as well. Another worrying part of this is with the rise of podcast speaking tours. What happens if someone shoots podcasters or starts targeting podcasters for things they say? This is like the debate about comedians a couple of years ago when they were being cancelled for jokes. Are comedians going to be safe? What if they tell out an offensive joke aimed at a certain individual or group? Are they at risk of being shot during a show? How about bands who play offensive music to certain people? Where does it fucking end? There's millions of podcasters out there. We all have our own views and opinions. What's to stop any nut from taking any type of shot at anybody? What does that mean for the future of speaking tours? Jordan Peterson goes around the world giving talks and lectures. So what does the future of that look like? It's pretty horrifying to think about, and it can have far-reaching consequences. So let's dig a little deeper. I found another article on sbs.com.au titled "People Starting to Act Out, How the Charlie Kirk Shooting Suggests a Vicious Spiral in the US." Is the US seeing a rise in political violence, and could it spread to Australia? The assassination of right-wing influencer Charlie Kirk makes a watershed moment in a surge of political violence, says experts who fear it will inflame an already fractured country and inspire more unrest. Kirk founded conservative advocacy group Turning Point USA and harnessed the power of social media to lure millions of young Americans into Trump's MAGA base. I love how they say lure. Maybe put a message out that resonated with young people. Young people aren't that fucking stupid. This week, the 31-year-old was addressing an outdoor crowd of about 3,000 at the University of Utah when he was shot. Dr. Ron Levy, a political theorist at ANU's College of Law, Governance and Policy, told SBS News, Kirk's shooting suggests that political violence is being normalised in the US. But while there has been a recent, quote, resurgence, political violence is not entirely new for the country, he added. Political violence has always been endemic in the American political system from before the Civil War. Obviously, during the Civil War to the first terrorist acts over 100 years ago, around issues of class difference and so on. So it's nothing new. 5 American presidents have been assassinated after all. Yeah, interesting. Trump himself was subject to 2 attempts last year. Mike Jensen, a researcher at the University of Maryland, which has tracked political violence in a terrorism database since 1970, said in the first 6 months of the year, the US experienced about 150 politically motivated attacks, nearly double as many as over the same period last year. Quote, I think we are in a very, very dangerous spot right now that could quite easily escalate into a more widespread civil unrest if we don't get a hold of it. This could absolutely serve as a kind of flashpoint that inspires more of it. What is fueling this political violence? Levy said that when societies are incapable of reasonable disagreement, they can view violence as a more reasonable action. When you don't have a sense of the fact that the other side might actually have something to say that is of value. When reasonable disagreement has no role in public discourse, then it might seem more reasonable to murder your opponents, he said. But of course, that's not a reasonable response. It was just a lack of information or a fired up population. Why is it more common in the US? Dr. Mark Rolfe, a lecturer in the School of Social Science at the University of New South Wales, told SBS News that politically motivated violence is a sort of background hum of American politics and society. You've got thousands of American deaths every year through gun violence, including kids. According to the most recent data compiled by the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, 46,728 people died from gun violence in the US in 2023, the third highest figure ever recorded. Fucking hell. Wow. That's a lot of fucking people. Yet nothing really ever seems to change. Experts in domestic terrorism cite a convergence of factors for increased violence in the US: economic insecurity, anxiety over shifting racial and ethnic demographics, and the increasingly inflammatory tone of political discourse. Traditional ideological divides, once centered on policy disagreements, have morphed into a deeper, more personal animosity. That anger is amplified by a mix of social media, conspiracy theory, and personal grievances. Levy said social and economic factors were underpinning political violence and its prevalence in the United States. He described poor education as causing division. You have extreme class disparities and people who are rather undereducated against that background. It's easy for people to believe things about other groups that are hateful, he said. That's something that many politicians are trying to exploit. It serves their political purposes to have these disparities if it means that they can rile people up more and more for their political gain. Since returning to office, Trump has scaled back efforts to counter domestic extremism, redirecting resources towards immigration enforcement and citing the southern border as a top security threat. Rolfe blames violence in part on American exceptionalism, heightening political conflict. When you are the best country in the world, you've got very high standards to maintain, and differing interpretations of those standards from different political quarters, which makes it a very fierce political arena. Interesting. Never quite viewed it like that before. Nevertheless, research shows Americans overwhelmingly reject political violence. A Reuters IPOS poll conducted in October last year asked if Americans agreed with a statement that it was acceptable for a member of my political party to threaten or intimidate others to achieve a political goal. Just 6% of the respondents, a trivially small share in terms of the opinion survey, said they agreed. Australia resists deep polarisation. Both Levy and Rolfe told SBS News that Australia wouldn't see similar cases of political violence. Levy explained that Australia's political system and ideologies play a part in resisting what he described as deep polarisation. Australian politics, for various reasons, is much more centrist in the extremes. The very right-wing or the very left-wing parties tend to appeal to just a handful, maybe a quarter of Australian voters overall, he said. I mean, that's pretty true. Australian politics is also pretty fucking boring. We have a couple of extreme characters, but they don't really make too much impact. They're viewed more as like the outside favourite. They're not taken that seriously because they are so over the top, or they're just completely discredited because they do come off a bit unhinged. And if you need an example of that from overseas, go to YouTube and type in Bob Catter, don't say that. And many of those voters are not really violent extremists. They're just people who take their politics to a further extreme. He also added that the rise of the very pragmatic independents could mean communities feel more in touch with and better represented by politicians, again reducing division. Looking ahead, Levy said, the way social media and artificial intelligence are regulated could play a role. Social media or AI could could be a destabilizing factor if we think that the media environment is important to whether we're polarized or not. Not sure I want a machine thinking for me or telling me what to think. How does the AI know what is extreme or not? Do we allow social media to divide us and make a profit out of ripping us apart? Rolf said that Australia is culturally and politically very different from the US. He pointed to the issue of gun control laws, which are a point of contention in the US, but was swiftly reformed in Australia after the Port Arthur mass shooting. Quote, "This is something that the Americans can't work out about us, that we have right-wingers like John Howard and others of his who pushed this through, as well as left-wingers who were united on the issue of gun control." Yeah, that's true. John Howard, the Prime Minister who banned guns, was right-wing, and it was unanimously backed across the board by both parties. And since guns have been banned, we haven't been overrun by New Zealanders or penguins or anybody else. Gun crime, I don't think, has really increased. It's kind of been the same. It's probably increased a little bit over the last couple of years in certain areas like Western Sydney and places like that, but on a nationwide scale, I'd say gun violence is probably the same, despite the fact the population has grown. Machete and knife crime, on the other hand, is a completely different issue, especially in Victoria. That kind of mass support doesn't happen there on these sorts of issues. Rolf said that the term polarised gets overused in Australian political commentating and argued that a more accurate description is fragmented. Interesting. Our parliamentary system and the compulsory and preferential and proportional systems involved has been an aid to better representation of different opinions. I'm not saying perfect representation, no voting system is, but better representation and therefore variety, and as I say, fragmentation. Over in the US, Jensen says the future appears grim. This is an administration that, whether you agree with it or not, has made profound changes to this country in the 8 months it's been in office, he said. Some people love it, some hate it. The people that hate it are starting to act out. People who love it are going to act out against those people who hate it, and it becomes a vicious spiral that could lead us into something really, really bad. Yeah, that's a very key point. The right will act out against the left to protect the right's interests, and the left are acting out because the right's making changes. It's a no-win situation for America if it keeps going like that. Yeah, and that's the really disturbing part of American politics. Is when you think of it like that, it's my team versus your team, and you're not seeing the human beings represented on either side. It's just right wing, left wing, liberal, Republican, Democrat, Republican, and it just keeps spiraling down until something like this happens. Yeah, that's a very interesting article, and it does put a lot of things in perspective, because we don't have the levels of extremes with Australian politics. The election last year was pretty unanimous who won, just like Trump's landslide win. The results weren't questioned. The other side pretty much put its tail between its legs and changed leadership and came back. But there's always this amicable quality among the parties. They disagree and they talk shit about each other, but it doesn't get violent like it does in the US and other countries. Here, yeah, maybe that's just because the politicians here aren't as extreme. They don't have the personalities. They're pretty boring in the grand scheme of things. Maybe that has something to do with it. Trump is a very larger-than-life character, and obviously Biden had some very obvious issues that were quite public. So the question remains, who killed Charlie Kirk? Was it the left, the right? Certainly think it was. But without motive or evidence, it will further divide an already angry and divided land. And this part of the podcast I wrote before the shooter was caught, before the shooter turned himself in. The shooter could have been just a left-wing lunatic with an agenda, or a far-left extremist hit. There are some parallels between Charlie Kirk's assassination and Trump's assassination attempts last year. Both are eerily similar to one another. Are the shooters in both cases patsies? I think Trump's wannabe assassin, it was definitely a patsy. There's nothing about that kid or that story makes any fucking sense. Like the house having been like forensically scrubbed before investigators turned up, and all the cutlery being gone. Him appearing in a Black Rock video, being a pretty decent student but being quiet and not really political. Then all of a sudden he just picks up a rifle, gets on a roof and tries to assassinate a presidential candidate. Something smells a bit fishy. In the last 48 hours, a lot of information about Charlie Kirk's shooter has come to light, especially surrounding his family and his upbringing, which has only really brought up more questions than answers, and unfortunately will probably fuel a whole lot more conspiracy theories. Now, I guess the ironic part about Charlie Kirk's assassination is he was a big supporter of the Second Amendment, and that ultimately took his life, and I say this respectfully. He was very vocal about gun ownership, and he has become a victim of gun violence. The rest of the Western world doesn't have an issue with gun control or mass shootings like the US does, and unfortunately it's become a bit of a sick art form and an everyday occurrence. So it brings up the question, what is the issue with gun control? Why is it so hard to get both sides of the political spectrum to agree on something that has affected all walks of life in the United States? Why the cultish obsession with the Second Amendment? You know, the freedom to own a gun shouldn't impede someone else's right to live or supersede someone's life, especially the lives of children and their futures. And an amendment is just that. It's meant to be amended and changed with the times. While preparing for this episode, I found a website called the National Constitution Center.org. It goes through the United States Constitution and explains all the amendments and what the common interpretations of the amendments are. These interpretations are by university professors and people who know what they're talking about. The interpretations are pretty detailed, and I'm not going to go into too much analysis on it because I'll be here all fucking day, and I've been recording for about fucking 5 hours, 6 hours at this point, man, getting pretty tired. While I was going through this website, I clicked on a random amendment, one I hadn't heard of before. I clicked on the Third Amendment. This is one that doesn't really get brought up a hell of a lot. It's called, "No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law." Kind of an obscure one, but the common interpretation, according to Gordon S. Wood, he's a university professor of history emeritus at Brown University. According to him, the Third Amendment seems to have no direct constitutional relevance at present. Indeed, not only is it the least litigated amendment in the Bill of Rights by the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court has never decided a case on the basis of it. Interesting. I bring that up because I really wanted to dig deep into what the Second Amendment actually means. Why is there so much emphasis on the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms? It should be pretty self-explanatory, but I really wanted to have a detailed look at why some Americans feel so strongly about the Second Amendment. Amendment 2, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Is this a case where it's just been read into too literally, or there's just so much importance placed on the Bill of Rights that people are taking amendments as gospel? And once again, I'm saying this respectfully, I'm trying to understand why gun control is such a divisive topic in the US. But the common interpretation of the Second Amendment by Nelson Lund, he's a university professor at George Mason University, and by Adam Rinkler, professor of law at the University of California, Los Angeles. So the common interpretation to Amendment 2 is the reasonable and unreasonable right to bear arms. Not a second-class right, the importance of the Second Amendment today. Modern debates about the Second Amendment have focused on whether it protects a private right of individuals to keep and bear arms, or a right that can be exercised only through militia organisations like the National Guard. This question, however, was not even raised until long after the Bill of Rights was adopted. It's quite a lengthy interpretation, so I'm just going to kind of briefly skim over it. You can look it up yourself at theconstitutioncenter.org. Many in the founding generation believe that governments are prone to use soldiers to oppress the people. Okay, that's a very good point. English history suggested that the risk could be controlled by permitting the government to raise armies consisting of full-time paid troops only when needed to fight foreign adversaries for other purposes such as responding to sudden invasions or emergencies. The government could rely on a militia that constituted of ordinary civilians who supplied their own weapons and received some part-time unpaid military training. Interesting. Does that still apply to 2025 though? Because the American military is pretty powerful and large, and I can't imagine they'd be relying too much on militias now. I think Texas is one of the few states that has a freestanding militia, I think. Don't quote me on that. That brings up the other question: do you really need military-grade weapons to protect your house, your family, or your community? If someone breaks into your house and you point an AK-47 at them, or a run-of-the-mill shotgun or pistol, the result's going to be the same. They're probably going to shoot themselves, and if you shoot them, they're still going to end up dead, no matter what size gun it is. But do you really need a high-powered military weapon, scope, extra magazine, a silencer, laser sight, and night vision goggles to protect your house? Won't a shotgun do the same thing? I guess from an outsider looking in, that's kind of how I'm looking at it. The onset of wars do not always allow time to raise and train an army, and the Revolutionary War showed that militia forces could not be relied on for national defence. The Constitutional Convention therefore decided that the federal government should have almost unfettered authority to establish peacetime standing armies and to regulate the militia. Okay, interesting. You can kind of see where this is going. Yeah, once again, I don't really think it applies too much in 2025. Definitely back then when you didn't have a freestanding army, and like you said, you had, like the article says, you had to rely on militias. Militias couldn't be relied upon. So coming up with a quick defence force was pretty vital to the nation's survival, especially when you were fighting the British Army that was at the time probably the most powerful and well-trained in the world. They were a professional army and were very good at what they did. It's actually a very good site. It goes into a lot of detail. The reasonable and unreasonable right to bear arms. There's a whole section by Adam Winkler about gun regulation is much part of the Second Amendment as the right to keep and bear arms. The text of the amendment, which refers to, quote, well-regulated militia, suggests as much. As the Supreme Court correctly noted in the District of Columbia versus Hilliard 2008, the militia of the founding era was the body of ordinary citizens capable of taking up arms to defend the nation. While the founders sought to protect the citizenry from being disarmed entirely, they did not wish to prevent government from adopting reasonable regulations of guns and gun owners to promote public safety. Interesting. I do like the bit in the Constitution about governments overstepping. The government shouldn't be able to just arm an army that could potentially take over the country. Citizens have a right to defend themselves and their communities. That would also have to rely on, would the army be loyal to the government or to the people? Because we've seen that with Rome. The army was always loyal to the generals, their leaders, not so much the emperor. In the third world it happens, I guess, so there is the examples for that. But I don't think the US Army would just blindly follow a corrupt government's orders to oppress its own people, especially when a lot of members of the military come from the communities they're probably told to oppress. So as it stands in 2025, the Second Amendment is literally killing the First Amendment. The right to have a gun is taking the lives of people who wish to exercise their free speech. The Western world is definitely in a state of decline and crisis. The mental health epidemic is plain as day to see. Sociopaths killing people on trains, lone shooters murdering advocates in public. billionaires pulling the strings in the shadows, corporations are more powerful than governments, there's a complete lack of respect or empathy, there's a lot of entitled and arrogant people out there, military-industrial complex is pushing its agenda, we have an overstimulated population, addicted to social media overload, and we're all slaves to an algorithm pumping out negative bullshit into our minds 24 hours a day. So what are you supposed to do? What kind of world are we fucking living in where death is shown to us on our phones every day, where killing kids in school is just another day, and where people openly mock and celebrate a good man's death? The corruption has been tolerated for, I think, way too long. Where does Western civilization go from here? We are really scraping the bottom of the barrel, but can we climb back out of it? Can it survive the sabotage that it has been under for the past 25 years? Rant over. Back to Charlie Kirk's assassination. It's been a few days since the assassination, and the conspiracy theories and misinformation have been running rampant, and that's nothing new in cases like this. A couple of hours after the event, the story changes. 2 days later, the story changes again. More information comes to light. And the shooter at the centre of Charlie Kirk's assassination is no different. There's been lots of conspiracy theories around him. Some of them are just outrightly ridiculous. And some versions of the event really do make you question things. Like the video of the shooter jumping off of the roof. I've seen this. He looked like he did have some type of bag in his hand, but like he dropped it. And apparently the cops found a rifle in the woods that belonged to the shooter. But when you see him jump off the roof, it doesn't really look like he has a rifle on him or a bag that could hold a rifle. Some of the other details of the story that have changed have been what was written on the bullets. It started out as trans quotes on the bullets, and then it has turned into something else. It's turned into Antifa quotes. I think my favourite conspiracy theory has been the one about it was these Israelis that assassinated him because he started talking out about Israel, which I think if any foreign state actor had anything to do with it, it would probably be Iran or China, North Korea, Russia. You get the country divided on itself. If you really wanted to piss someone off and keep people distracted, an assassination is definitely the way to get people's attention. Another conspiracy theory I thought was pretty funny was that the killer somehow got to a privately or publicly owned airfield and was flown out of the state or the country. A private plane apparently left that airport an hour after the shooting, and it didn't have its transponders on or something, or it turned, I don't know, radar off or something like that. And according to the guy that owns the plane in the airfield, that's common practice for small airplanes because they don't fly in the same path as commercial planes. It was only like small regional flights. So if they appear on radar, it gets confused with the other radio control data or something that comes in. And apparently it's a common industry practice. I thought that one was pretty funny. And then there was the one about the bearded guy cheering after the shooting, looking back at the roof like he knew where the shot had come from. Or Charlie's security guards giving hand signals. And maybe they were giving hand signals to other security guards in the crowd. Maybe they were telling them that he's about to speak or something, and to watch out for people opening bags or putting their hands into pockets or something like that. Because a couple of weeks ago I was watching one of Charlie Kirk's videos and I was thinking to myself, what happens if one of these like unhinged students like pulls a gun out of a bag and tries to shoot him? Because he's so close to the people he talks to, and it doesn't seem to be like there's a huge security presence. I mean, maybe they check the students before they come to these things, but it seemed very relaxed. Then there's the weird TMZ footage showing this kid like kind of limping across the road, going to the school, and then a couple of hours later you see him running back through a field on the opposite side of the road. He doesn't seem to have a bag with him or anything. It's very curious. It only adds to the conspiracy theories, and I guess we'll probably never know the full picture. Is America's culture in crisis? Does America have a cancer in the middle of this culture that is driving this wedge between Americans? Can the United States be saved, or can it heal? And will it take the left to admit they backed a toxic and poisonous ideology? That has really fractured the civility of political life. It's a dangerous time for free speech, if there is such a thing anymore. There's always consequences to speaking your mind to some degree, but this is taking things to the absolute extreme. So what does this mean for podcasts and activists moving forward? What do we know about the assassin? His name was Tyler Robinson. He appears to be a student at the Utah College. He set up a sniper's nest on the roof of one of the college buildings, overlooking the grounds where Charlie Kirk was doing his debate. There's a building sticking out to the right, which if the tent was moved over several more meters, he wouldn't have had a clear shot. It's pretty clear from the photos of the sniper's nest that he knew what he was doing, and a fair degree of planning and thought had gone into this. This wasn't just some random attack. There was impressions in the pebbles on the roof, a footprint, a handprint, and that seems to back up the CCTV footage of him running across the rooftop and jumping off the building, making his getaway through the car park. There's also a vision of him running across the rooftop. I think he was spotted by a couple of students, and yet nothing was done about him. And this is an eerily similar set of circumstances to the assassination attempt on Trump. People were told that there was some type of suspicious person on the roof, and nothing was done about it. So what was found on the roof? Besides the footprints, there were several bullet casings. These bullet casings had inscriptions on them. That was a detail that was mentioned a couple of days ago before they knew the shooter's identity. But the content of the inscriptions was up for debate. People thought it was some type of trans messages or something like that. But that story has changed a little bit. Apparently what was inscribed on the bullets is even weirder than that. Apparently one bullet had the Italian anti-fascist song Bella Ciao lyrics inscribed on it. This song is also used by Antifa. Another bullet had up and down arrows inscribed on it, which is a reference to a code used in the game Helldivers 2. Another one had some type of furry meme on it or something like that, which is fucking weird. What these messages seem to indicate is that Tyler Robinson had been radicalized. And if you know anything about Antifa, they are supposedly an anti-fascist organization that uses violence to enforce their messaging. There's still a lot of details up in the air about Tyler Robinson, who he was, who is this kid, and why did he carry out this heinous attack. In my opinion, I don't think he was acting alone. I don't think it was just some random lone wolf attack. I think it connects to a deeper conspiracy. Apparently he was part of an online Discord group, and he asked someone in this group if they could pick up the rifle, which is interesting because how did the cops find it then? Which makes me think that the rifle that the police presented was not so much planted, but it was thrown out there just to satisfy the public. And what better way to do that? By just finding the gun used in the crime. In the initial investigation, the evidence strongly suggests that Mr. Robinson is part of a far left group, or he has been radicalized by the far left. And the way it's looking, it could have been part of a bigger conspiracy. I'm not saying that just to throw out a conspiracy theory. It generally looks like this Mr. Robinson was involved in some type of far left conspiracy, and it has links to his Discord group, which I think the police and the FBI really need to release the Discord chat. That people need to see what and who he was talking to. And I don't think he's probably going to be the only person arrested or charged in this crime either. His political views are a little less obvious. He doesn't seem to be that political. He doesn't come from a overly political family. The family is Republican. But apparently in the last couple of years he had become more political and more aggressively so. So the question remains is, how was he radicalized so quickly? He seems to start off as a normal kid, but he ends up the most hated man in the United States. Who was he talking to or getting his orders from on Discord? And unfortunately, I think things are only going to get more complicated from here on out. And he is such an anomaly when it comes to shooters, as we saw with the Minnesota church shooting. He comes from a loving family and seems to get radicalized by nihilists and worships mass shooters. Tyler Robinson, on the other hand, seems to be a pretty normal kid. He comes from what appears to be a very normal, loving family. He's got 2 brothers. He's an avid outdoorsman and hunter. He seems like a smart kid too. He gets a scholarship to the university, a presidential scholarship. So he doesn't seem to be a dummy. He seems to be a pretty smart kid. Not the kind of candidate you would think would be easily radicalized. It doesn't make sense. The cause of the radicalization needs to really be investigated and made public. I think the public needs to be aware of how radicalization can happen so quickly so others can look for the signs of it and prevent things like this from happening ever again. So how did things go so wrong for this kid? Where was Tyler Robinson radicalized? How was he radicalized? Who did it and why? Was it left groups in college or the extreme left Antifa groups or some type of radical left Discord group? Or was it just because he became exposed to these ideas in college and it was reinforced by the educational system, not for the purposes of turning him into a Manchurian candidate or anything like that, but just because that's how the education system seems to have gone in recent years. It does push a very woke agenda, and it's not just in the US, this is happening all over the Western world. To dig deeper into Tyler Robinson's background, I found an article on Reuters.com called Who is Tyler Robinson? The Suspect in Charlie Kirk's Murder by Andrew Hay, Nathan Lane and Joseph Axe, published the 13th of September 2025. 18-year-old Tyler Robinson seemingly had a bright future ahead of him. The Utah teen had scored in the top percentile on his college entrance exam and earned himself a 4-year scholarship to Utah State University in Logan. His proud mother posted a video on Facebook in which her firstborn son, the oldest of 3, read aloud the school letter offering him a grant. So this guy isn't a dummy. He seems like a pretty intelligent, normal kid. So how do things go so wrong? Quote, he's so excited to start his journey and it's going to be so amazing for him, she wrote in another post. 4 years later, authorities say Robinson fired a rifle shot on Tuesday from atop a building at another university campus, killing conservative influencer Charlie Kirk and triggering a new round of national anxiety over rising political violence. Investigators are still working to understand what allegedly led Robinson to that rooftop. Officials have not yet identified a precise motive for the shooting, though they offered some clues on Friday morning in announcing his arrest. Utah Governor Spencer Cox told reporters that a family member interviewed by law enforcement said Robinson had recently mentioned Kirk's scheduled appearance at Utah University, where he was shot. And you have to respect the father because he was the one that contacted a family friend and turned his son in. He recognized him from the still photos from the CCTV footage, which couldn't be a easy choice for any father or parent to make. Quote, they talked about why they didn't like him and the viewpoints he had, Cox said, without offering further details. But not liking someone and killing someone are two extremes, which makes this guy's motives just all the more worrisome. Robinson had also become more political in recent years. The family member told investigators, and authorities said he had engraved what appeared to be anti-fascist messages on bullet casings they found with a suspected murder weapon. Robinson, now 22, was arrested for aggravated murder and other charges. He has no criminal history according to state records. He was a registered voter but was not affiliated with a political party. According to voter records, he is listed as an inactive voter, which indicates he did not cast a ballot in last year's election. At the time of the shooting, Robinson was living at his parents' house in Washington, a farming and residential community of approximately 28,000 near Zion National Park in southwest Utah. Robinson's grey Dodge Challenger, the vehicle that authorities say he drove to the site of the shooting on Tuesday, was parked on Friday outside the two-story stucco home in a relatively new housing development built among alfalfa fields. Apparently, he drove to school in the grey Charger, gets changed, then is seen on CCTV wearing the black t-shirt with the American flag on it and a hat, the same clothes he used during the assassination. So for a kid to be that smart and go through the effort to wear the hat and sunglasses, cover his identity, change his clothing, it sounds like he kind of fucked up by being seen driving the grey Dodge Challenger into the car park and then driving the same car back to his house. For a kid to be that smart to get a college scholarship, he doesn't seem to have covered his tracks that well. He could have had a far better disguise covering his face, but I suppose he wanted to blend in. And I think using your own car is also fucking retarded. Like, it's probably going to be the first thing that people look into. He could have used a skateboard or a push bike or something like that. It just seems like he didn't really think this through. It seems like all the anger is directed at Charlie Kirk and wanting to assassinate him. He doesn't really seem to have put too much thought into getting it away, really. Dozens of media members were gathered outside along with half a dozen police cars parked alongside the street. Officers were stopping reporters from approaching the home. A neighbour, Stephen Green, said he knew the family from attending the same Mormon church down the street. Quote, "Great family, good kids," he said, though he added he did not know Tyler Robinson well. Kanan Timothy, 21, said he was in the year below Robinson at high school. Robinson, he said, was just a regular student with an interest in music who hung out with members of the school band. "I knew him in passing, just your average kid," said Timothy, who lives 2 blocks from the Robinson family. Tyler was quiet, but not too quiet. And this is nearly an identical MO to the Trump shooter. Regular kid, did well at school, didn't really stand out, just a regular run-of-the-mill guy. Nothing too spectacular about him. It's nearly the same MO. Is it just a coincidence, or is this kid from the same assassin school that the other little twat was from? There's no way the Trump shooter was just some random lone wolf attack. It's way too fucking suspicious for that. He was definitely a patsy. This guy, on the other hand, I don't know if he's a patsy. I think he was really just caught up with the indoctrination and decided to act, because he doesn't really seem to have put too much effort into getting away. Robinson was arrested late on Thursday without incident after our family friend called authorities and said Robinson had either confessed or implied that he was responsible for Kirk's murder. Robinson graduated in 2021 from Pine Valley High School in St. George, Utah. A video online of the commencement ceremony shows him carrying his diploma on stage as attendees cheer. He briefly attended Utah State University in Logan for one semester that fall, the school confirmed to Reuters. It was not immediately clear why he left, but Dixie Technical College put off Utah Public University system confirmed he was a third-year student in the school's electrical apprenticeship program. A Facebook post from his mother said Robinson had earned a score of 34 in high school and the ACT college entrance exam, which would put him in the top 1% of test takers, according to Princeton Review. He has 2 younger brothers, according to his parents' Facebook post. His mother listed her job online as social worker at a non-profit healthcare company, which his father is the principal of a company that makes stone countertops, according to state records. His mother's Facebook posts over the years, most of which were deleted on Friday, mostly dotted on her family, documenting trips to Alaska, the Caribbean and Disneyland, celebrating school plays, Halloween costumes, and adopted pet rabbits, expressing pride as the 3 boys move up to school. The regular run-of-the-mill family, not a candidate that you'd think would do something like this, which just makes it even weirder. None of the posts appeared overly political. Other posts show Robinson and his brothers occasionally with guns. Though that is not uncommon in a state with permissive firearm laws, Robinson's arrest on Thursday evening capped a 33-hour manhunt for Kirk's killer, which included the detention of 2 other persons of interest on Wednesday who were later released. Robinson was booked into a Utah County jail in Spanish Fork, 12 miles south of the university where Kirk was shot. He has not yet formally been charged. Really, really odd. I don't think Tyler Robinson is a patsy. I don't think he was put there by the deep state or some type of covert government entity. I don't think he's a Manchurian candidate or anything too conspiratorial. I think he's just a smart kid who became radicalized by this far left ideology. Apparently he had a trans partner or something like that. I think he kind of fell in with the wrong crowd, believed bullshit and got his mind twisted, which is odd because he does seem like a smart guy, but I guess some of the smartest people believe the dumbest shit. But I don't think there is anything too conspiratorial in this. I think he in his warped mind, he thought he was going to silence Charlie Kirk, and obviously waiting for him to talk about guns and then shooting him in the throat is a very clear message. Yeah, it just seems this kid went bad somewhere. The question now is how he was radicalized, where he was radicalized. Does his Discord chats reveal anything of interest or to a bigger conspiracy? Because I think if there is any conspiracy in the story, it's going to be in those Discord chats, who he was talking to. Was he groomed by Antifa members or the far left to carry out this attack? Because I don't think he did this alone. I think he had help, or he was told, he was motivated to do it, because there's a lot of things about this kid that just don't add up. He just looks like your run-of-the-mill dorky fucking uni kid. It's another article from Reuters that's going to give us a bit more detail into the manhunt for Tyler Robinson. It's titled "Suspect in Charlie Kirk Murder in Custody After 33-Hour Manhunt" by Andrew Hay and Jarrett Renshaw. It's 13th of September 25. I'm just going to skip over it. "We got him," Utah Governor Spencer Cox told reporters at a briefing on Friday. Expressing relief after an intense manhunt by local and federal law enforcement followed Kirk's murder on Wednesday. The suspect, identified as 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, was taken into custody Thursday night, about 33 hours after the shooting. FBI Director Kash Patel told reporters the agency had received more than 11,000 tips as of Friday morning, the most since the 2013 Boston Marathon bombings, he said. Yeah, wow. It's a lot of tips to get in a short amount of time. It shows you, the FBI get a lot of shit, but it shows you really how hard they work and how good they are at their job. If they've processed 11,000 tips in 33 hours, it shows you how hard they work and how many personnel they've got that were dedicated to this. If you've seen that movie Patriots Day, it's a great film. It really puts into perspective how detailed and how focused the FBI are when they investigate events like this. That scene in the warehouse where they've got all the people set up on computers who are going over every piece of CCTV footage, and they've recreated the street, and they've got the cop, played by Mark Wahlberg, to go through and tell them where all the buildings and cameras are, and they piece together all the pieces of evidence from the bombing is all laid out where it was found, and how they narrow it down to a couple of shops where the bomber must have been watching, and that's eventually how they get him. Robinson was captured after a relative and family friend alerted the local sheriff's office that he had confessed to them or implied he had committed the murder. "I want to thank the family members of Tyler Robinson who did the right thing in this case and were able to bring him into law enforcement," Cox said. "Through some process, the family came to know that this had happened." Yeah, that must have been a really tough choice. It also shows the family have some morality to them. Rather than trying to get him across the border or something like that, or get him out of town, they turned him in, knowing full well there is a very high likelihood that their 22-year-old son is going to get a death penalty, and his story is probably not going to end very well. So that is a huge moral choice to make on your loved one, And yes, he did the wrong thing, and he 100% deserves to be turned in. But look at that from the family's perspective. That's not an easy choice to make. The killing has stirred outrage among Kirk supporters and denunciations of political violence from Democrats, Republicans, and foreign governments. It's an attack on all of us, Utah governor said, calling Kirk's murder a watershed in American history and comparing it to the rash of US political assassinations in the 60s. It's an attack on the American experiment. It is an attack on our ideals. Yeah, I think he's 100% right on that. And I think the consequences of this are going to be felt for a very long time. In her first public comments since her spouse was gunned down, Erica Kirk vowed in a tearful but defiant live-streamed message on Friday evening that, quote, the movement built by her husband will not die and that his radio podcast would continue. It's very powerful too. The end of it is fucking brutal. When she's talking about her daughter coming up to her after not seeing her for a day saying, I miss you, mummy, where's daddy? Fucking absolutely crushing. And yeah, who knows, maybe the Turning Point USA becomes the biggest political movement in history. And if you know anything about history, movements like this usually do become bigger if the leader is assassinated. You can't silence movements like this through violence. It makes them stronger. And I think that's what's going to happen with this. He had some very powerful friends, including Donald Trump, the president, obviously, who referred to him as his fourth son. I think the far left has failed in their objective. They're only going to make this movement bigger and stronger. He was a champion of the truth. He was always outspoken about the radicalization of students on college campuses. And unfortunately, he was right. Tyler Robinson just proved the point that students are being radicalized on college campuses. The who, where, why, when, and how is the big question. Charlie Kirk was ultimately proved right. She also thanked the ranks of law enforcement who worked tirelessly to capture my husband's assassin. The United States has been experiencing its most sustained period of political violence in decades. Reuters has documented more than 300 cases of political motivated violent acts across the ideological spectrum since supporters of Trump attacked the US Capitol on January 6, 2021. I think it's been going on well before 2021. Trump himself has survived 2 attempts, which we already know about. Suspect profile emerges. The governor declined to discuss possible motives for the killing, but in describing inscriptions investigators found on ammunition recovered from the scene, Cox said one of the casings bore the message, "Here fascists catch," adding in response to reporters' questions, "I think that speaks for itself." Kirk, well-known connected activist, author and co-founder of the influential conservative student group Turning Point USA, has friends with Vice President J.D. Vance, Trump's family, and others at the highest echelons of the US government. Patel, the FBI director, also offered a personal tribute at the press conference. "Rest now, brother. We have the watch. I'll see you in Valhalla." He said in closing his remarks, referring to the heavenly reward for warriors in Norse mythology. That's interesting because Charlie Kirk was very Christian, but I guess it's more the message a statement like that conveys rather than the actual belief in it. Speaking hours later on YouTube from the studio of his radio podcast series, The Charlie Kirk Show, Erica Kirk urged young people to join Turning Point and exalted her husband as a fallen hero who, quote, now and for all eternity will stand at his Savior's side wearing the glorious crown of a martyr. Kirk appeared at Utah Valley on Wednesday as part of the planned 15-event American Comeback Tour of college campuses, having just returned to the US from a speaking tour in South Korea and Japan. Interesting. Known for his often provocative yada yada yada, we know all that. Quote, "We will never be able to solve all the other problems, including the violence problems that people are worried about, if we can't have a clash of ideas safely and securely," the governor said on Friday. "That's why this matters so much." Interesting. There's still not a very clear motive for this guy. I have one last article to get through. This is from theguardian.com that hopefully might provide us a bit more background. It was published today, in fact, titled "Questions Linger About Alleged Shooter's Motivation for Killing Charlie Kirk," published the 14th of September 2025 by Lauren Atani. I'm not going to read all of it because we already know most of the details. In the absence of a clear motive for the slain, reports have tried to piece together information about Robinson and his background. He is a third-year student in an electrical apprenticeship program at Dixie Technical College, yada, yada, yada. Both his parents were registered Republicans, although his personal political beliefs remain unclear. Now deleted pictures on social media show Robinson and his family posing with guns. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal published on Saturday, Utah's Governor Spencer Cox said, "It's very clear to us and to investigators that this was a person who was deeply indoctrinated with leftist ideology." Cox cited the findings on the ongoing investigation into Robinson and his possible motive, but did not provide any further details about how officials arrived at that conclusion. Interesting, and that's, I think you have to get all your ducks in a row in situations like this. You have to be 100% transparent with the information, and if you're not providing details on how the officials have basically said that this guy's been indoctrinated by a leftist ideology, more conspiracy theories will spring up, and then the left will say, "Oh, you're just blaming us for this, yada, yada, yada." You need to be very transparent with information, which unfortunately governments and officials never are in these circumstances. The FBI declined to comment about reporting on Saturday by conservative media outlets Fox News and the New York Post, citing law enforcement sources that Robinson lived with a partner who was trans, a member of the community against whom Kirk rallied, and was cooperating with investigators. That was an interesting one too. Like, was he in a relationship with a trans person, or are they just saying that to add more fuel to the fire? And this is why people don't believe government officials and the ABC agencies. You have to, like I said, you've got to be transparent with this information. Regardless, Cox's remarks were published a day after he delivered a speech following Robinson's arrest. Quote, "Bad stuff happens, and for 33 hours I was praying that if this had to happen here, it wouldn't be one of us," Cox said. That somebody drove from another state, somebody came from another country. Sadly, that prayer was not answered the way I had hoped for. He went on to explain that it would have been easier on us if the suspect weren't from the community. So he sounds like he's trying to save a bit of face for his state. Yeah, I get where he's coming from. He doesn't want to have the state's reputation tarnished, but at the same time, it's always going to be connected with this horrific crime. Quote, just because I thought it would make it easier on us to say, hey, we don't do that here. Indeed, Utah is a special place. We lead the nation in charitable giving. We lead the nation in service every year, Cox said, tears welling in his eyes. But it didn't happen here. But it did happen here, and it was one of us. After Robinson's identity was revealed, some conservatives have softened their attacks against Kirk's alleged murderer as an individual, but continue to leverage anger towards liberals as a group. Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina tweeted on Wednesday that, quote, "It's time to bring back the death penalty following Kirk's murder." On Friday, Mace said that Kirk would want us to pray for such an evil and lost individual like Tyler Robinson to find Jesus Christ. "We will try to do the same," she wrote. She later doubled down on the death penalty, saying some crimes are so evil, the only just punishment is the death penalty. But referring to the way the suspect's father reportedly had a role in turning him over to authorities, she also said, "We are sending prayers and our high regards to Tyler Robinson's father for doing the right thing." Cox's speech has largely been praised as highlighting unity during a divisive moment, providing stark contrast to Donald Trump, who considered Kirk a close ally. The president on Friday appeared on Fox and Friends and was asked by Ainsley Earhart, "How do we fix this country? How do we come back together?" Quote, "The radicals on the right are radical because they don't want to see crime," Trump said. "The radicals on the left are the problem, and they are vicious and horrible and politically savvy. They want men in women's sports. They want transgender people. They want open borders, the worst thing that happened to this country. Conservatives had latched onto reports that have since been retracted that the casings for the bullets found with a gun that police suspect was used to kill Kirk were engraved with markings indicating trans ideology. To the surprise of literally no one, Megyn Kelly said on her show earlier in the aftermath of Kirk's killing, there's one particular group that's been running around killing Americans in the name of ideology, and it's transgender activists or individuals, or those who proclaim they are. Once Robinson's identity was revealed, Kelly speculated that Robinson must have been radicalised after going to college. This kid got radicalised and obviously had a psychotic break. I'm disturbed to see that he appears to have come from a loving, intact family, Kelly said. If you look at the family's social media profile, it looks like a happy family. It looks like a loving mum and a loving dad. He had 2 younger brothers. There's lots of photos of them going on vacations and family dinners. Kelly noted, while authorities will be seeking the death penalty, it is ultimately a mental health issue that underpins the radicalisation of young people who go to college. Yeah, interesting. Because I think you have to be impressionable to some degree or have some type of mental health issue, depression or something like that. I'm not a psychiatrist, so don't ask me. That makes you a little more susceptible to radicalisation. Anything I believe I have researched thoroughly because I want to make sure it's 100% sound before I believe in it, because if you're not going to believe the truth, then you are going to fall for a lie, and unfortunately that's what's happened on a mass scale in Western society. Because not everyone can be brainwashed, not everyone buys into ideology. It seems to be certain people who go to the absolute extremes, and this is the same shit that happened in communist Russia, which led to the deaths of millions of people. People believe this bullshit, whether I think deep down they knew it was a lie, but that's what everyone believed. That's what the state sponsored. And if you went against that narrative, you were a part of the problem. And if you didn't get on board, you got killed or sent to a gulag. So, what do you think? Tyler Robinson seems to be a pretty normal kid like the article and all the evidence says, from a loving family. So where does he go so wrong? The question now is where and how he was radicalised so quickly. I'm going to point my finger at the online community. College probably has a fair bit to answer for as well. But it'll be interesting to see what develops over the coming weeks and months. I think the legacy of Charlie Kirk will be to encourage young people to fight the programming, to ask questions again, to not get sucked in by ideology and indoctrination, to use logic, ask questions, come to your own conclusions, do the research for yourself and don't rely on others to force feed you their own beliefs or what they consider to be true, and to respect other people's ideas and encourage people to talk to the opposite side to find out why they believe what they believe, and to encourage young people to find a faith, start a family, and bring back old-fashioned family values, which I think are sorely missing in the Western world. It's unbelievable and believable what happened all at the same time, and I hope his legacy does live on, and condolences to his family. So rest in peace, Charlie Kirk.
Aussie Afterlife is a podcast that retells true paranormal stories and presents real audio evidence such as EVPs from my own paranormal investigations. My name is Sam, and I am the sole creator and host of this enthralling podcast. I have always had a deep fascination and love for the paranormal. So naturally, I thought, well, why not create a podcast? Like, I'm 35. I've got to make myself relevant in some way, right? I was always surprised at how many everyday people have had paranormal experiences. Like, we all can't be wrong or going mad. Well, we can, but no, we can't. I'm going to stick with you. Can't all be wrong. Otherwise, I'd have to come to the realisation that I've wasted an enormous amount of time. Anyway, if you want to hear true paranormal stories and real ghostly voices, come join Aussie Afterlife. It's the most fun you'll have with your clothes on. Or you might not have clothes on. I wouldn't know either way. Ah, that adds a different layer of mystery again, doesn't it? See? It's exciting already. Come on. Press play. You know you want to.
And that brings us to the end of the episode. A big thank you to everyone who listened to the end. If you'd like to support the Truth Tank, there's a couple of things you can do. Head on over to the Facebook and Instagram page, give them a follow and a like. You can check out all the latest reels on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. Engage in the posts, give them a like, share them around, repost them, help spread the word. You can download and listen to your favorite episodes of the Truth Tank on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Audible, YouTube, Pandora, Castbox, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell anyone you think might like the show. Help spread it around and get the word out there. You can leave a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast player. And I'll be back in the next week or two with a brand new show. But until then, I'm the Tank. This is the truth. Truth to tell.